so much. And thanks everybody for coming to this panel discussion today. This is the best time for a panel. This is the panel after lunch. The next one is right before happy hour, so this is the sweet spot, so I appreciate you coming. We had a great topic today. I think I counted, we had the longest title of any panel, of any discussion in the whole agenda, so thanks for that. It's also probably the only discussion where the word AI isn't in the title of the topic, but I already said the word AI, so we'll say it again. It's a great topic that we're going to talk about. We have some great panelists, so we'll let them introduce themselves. So I don't know who wants, which end we want to start on. Please.
You can start with me. First, I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so we'll see how much I can actually talk. But my name is Kevin Myers. I'm the director of our Salesforce practice here at Act 2. And so I've been with Act 2 for a little over a year. And I've been consulting for like a little over 20 years. So yeah, hopefully, obviously, I'll try to answer as much as I can, but yeah, excuse my voice.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Green. I help companies lead through complexity by building adaptive cultures. In my, about 6 years ago, Sheetz, which is a convenience and fuel retailing company. Some of you may know Sheetz. Anybody know Sheetz in the audience? Yeah. And also a brand. It's really got a brand associated with it. About 6 years, the company hired me as the Chief Innovation Officer. And in that time, I have established an innovation office during a rapid period of growth for the company. In the past 6 years, we've nearly doubled in revenues, and so a high period of disruption, along with everything else that's going on in the world. And I, at its height, hired about 26 people, a combination of full-time and fractional, to support the innovation function. I helped open an office in Pittsburgh to tap into new energy and talent. The headquarters is in central Pennsylvania, and that was the first. And the third thing was really establish a practice of experimentation, which allowed us to focus on learning from failures, as well as collecting data, good enough data, to help drive decision making. My opinions are my own, I will say, but I will definitely draw on some of those experiences to share with you.
Hello, Robert Sheesley. So I started out as a technologist 100 or so years ago with electronic data systems. I joined the organization because I had a man crush on Ross Perot. I graduated with a bachelor's and an MBA from Clearview University just north of here. And 7 years at EDS was a really solid foundation for me from a technological perspective. I was not a technologist when I came out of business school. I think I had one COBOL class and maybe a few. I did a lot of statistical analysis in graduate school. But yeah, I found myself, I landed in technology, and it's been a great career. After EDS, I was at places like Anderson Consulting, West River Partners, and Alvarez & Marcel, predominantly doing merger and acquisition integrations, due diligence and integration, a few divestitures, not just within technology, but in operations as well. And my last, I think Matt mentioned, I reported into the CIO over at UPMC for a few years and ran strategic technology over there, ran enterprise architecture at Mylan under Michael Smith, and my last non-consulting gig was Chief Information Officer of Wrench Group, a private equity-backed consolidator of home services companies across the country. So I got the invitation from Matt, and I'm thrilled to be here. I live in Florida now, but we have a home in the woods about an hour and a half east of here in Indiana County, so it's good to be back in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh. So thank you.
Thank you all. As you can see, we have some great panelists. The reason I'm standing down here and not up here, I can't stand still. Much of that is because of all the coffee. I drink some Sheetz. So I'm probably going to move around a little bit, so I'll try the best I can not to walk in front of the group as they're speaking. The reason why we're here today, obviously, is to talk about innovation. And all the sessions you've seen today, and you'll see tomorrow, about transformation and change. And sometimes I think we forget about how that impacts the people in the organization, the human beings. It's easy to say we're going to implement a CRM system or an AI tool, but what about those people that have to use that tool? I deal with that a lot every day. Anyone that follows the news knows that every day there are things changing in governmental organizations that are here and gone, and people were, you talked to yesterday don't exist in that role the next day, and that impacts people. So that's what we're going to talk about. How does this change? How does all this change impact the people? So Mary Beth, I'll start with you, if you don't mind. As a leader in an organization, what can leaders do to help transition employees as they're going through this disruptive change that really happens every single day in their lives?
So I think that as leaders, it's really important that we start with ourselves and reflect on how we navigate change, how we also model that change. One of the things that I learned in setting up an innovation office and hiring a new type of talent is this term for a type of person called T-shaped person. Has anyone ever heard of a T-shaped person? I think it's kind of borrowed from the design thinking world, but it's this idea of a person who can go deep into sort of an area, a functional area, or maybe a technical area, but still has an acumen to go across functions and a desire to go across functions with some ease so you can move forward. Another term that I've heard for this is purple people, so people who are both technical and business skill, a combination of blue and red. So for whatever that might inspire, I really discovered that this is a combination of a mindset and a skill set that works really well in ambiguity. And so it is something that I think can be, it is not natural for everybody. Some people are more T-shaped than others. But what I have done personally is to cultivate those skills in myself. I do enjoy operating on that level, but also look to hire that type of person. But again, it still requires some cultivation. And so one of the things that I do as a leader to continue to kind of cultivate my purpleness, we'll say, or my T-shapedness, is experiment as much as I can with different tools. And one tool that I have recently been experimenting with is an AI called Coach. And I think of it as my thought partner. I think all of us have probably dived into chat in various degrees of diving in ourselves and experimenting with that. But as one example, I make sure that I am modeling that, I share that with my team, and I learn from them and what they're doing as well. Another way to cultivate this, of course, is to inspire people to go and do new things, put themselves in different situations. I think going to conferences and interacting with people is a great way to do that, as an example. One of the things that I also do is I teach. I teach an undergraduate course at Pitt, and I teach because I learned so much from that. It's commercializing new technology, but I really focus on these types of skills of nurturing sort of creativity, and again, this mindset of, we'll call it sort of an entrepreneurial mindset, as well as then these adaptive skills that can go both deep and broad. And the other thing that this does is it gives me a front row seat to the new professionals coming into our world, which is pretty awesome. So I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to spend some time in different hubs, conferences, universities, wherever. I think that's another great opportunity. And I do encourage my team members to do the same. And then the third thing is have an eye toward building some systems, but that is a longer term kind of discussion. But those are some things that I thought were important to share that I learned in my recent experience that we can do right now as leaders ourselves, as well as encouraging that in the leaders that are on our teams.
Thank you. It's fantastic. One of the things, and I feel so far away from the panel, I apologize. No offense to anybody over there, but I'll walk over here. Mary Beth, you talked about skills, and I heard that word a few times in your comments. So Kevin, I wanted to turn it over to you and talk about how we can upskill people. The best way to do that, some experiences you've had, because as part of that transformation, you have to learn those new skills to get through.
Sure, yeah, and it really becomes, I think, for a lot of us that are leading teams, and I've been leading teams of primarily Salesforce consultants for, like the last 10 years. So it's always something new. There's always something new on the horizon when it comes to technology. And obviously with a lot of the innovation that has taken part over the last few years with AI. I think that we're going to talk AI today, but AI was such a key thing for Hike 2 to really dive into, make sure that everybody understood exactly what it was. It's really getting that basic level of knowledge, and so getting people certified, and then starting to introduce the different tools into our environment. And so one of the things that we did, not just for our developers and engineers or consultants or PMs, but even at our HR level or talent acquisition, is identifying the different tools that we could use that would actually make us more efficient and better to use these things as we are go into the market. I think one of the key things that we have to be mindful of, though, is a lot of these tools are, as you saw in Peter's talk this morning, they're going upwards, and we're learning like this, and we have to trust the tool, but they're continuing to evolve, and so the skill sets that we're seeing to help with our engineering side of things, it's shifting a little bit of the work from maybe developing the solution via code to verifying and testing. You just can't do it and think it's going to do it 100% right at this point in time. There is a certain skill set that needs to continue to be developed, and that's something that we're very focused on at Hike 2. And lastly, we have groups of people that are focused on identifying the different types of tools that we are using, putting together templates that all of our consultants can leverage when we are actually using these, because it becomes a thing that is about educating all of our people on how to use these tools. And one of the things that I've always done is just surround yourself with really smart people. They'll usually bring up circumstances of how they use something, and it teaches you how to do something better. And so that's one of the key things that we do. It's just constant education and providing that information to our people.
Great, thank you. Robert, I'll turn it over to you. By the way, my son next week's going to look it up, IUP, so perhaps I'll drive past your Indiana property sometime. But anyway, that's not important. But one of the biggest changes that anybody can go through is a merger and acquisition, really on either side. And so you have a lot of experience in that. So talk a little bit about how mergers and acquisitions and how you can help the staff, the employees that are going through those changes, as maybe the merger or the merger, depending on the skill set and the organization.
Yep. Thank you for that question. I have a question for the audience before I answer that. How many people think they're at a technology summit right now? That's good. That's good. And there's a reason why I asked that question, right? In the merger and acquisition world, we've matured a great deal in our thinking about how we conduct due diligence. From the time that I got involved in M&A, it was 1997, large merger between two Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, Illinois and Texas, and I built the IMO office there, and we consolidated data centers. We moved operations call centers from urban areas to rural areas for cost relief and help build the business case around why those two blues were merging. But at the end of the day, technology, although you have to do some due diligence in the technology world, and you've got to be able to present risk to the buyer, whether it's private equity or otherwise, you've got to be able to present risk. You've got to be able to present your perspective on what you think the integration is going to cost. And the integration is determined based on the thesis of the transaction, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, a divestiture. And what I mean by that is, to the degree that if it's a merger or acquisitions, the leadership wants to and has in their mind an opportunity for cost reduction, cost removal as a result of synergy, the elimination of redundant software and technology, then that thesis is going to, I think, inform the due diligence process in a way that if you otherwise are just merging and rolling up reporting of all these acquired companies, it's different, right? Regardless, someone's getting affected through the merger or the acquisition, whether you're part of the company that's acquiring or you're part of the company that's getting acquired. So to the degree that you can plant seeds of change readiness, the young lady who spoke earlier, Shannon Gregg, Dr. Gregg, mentioned some interesting points of view. Has anyone heard of the Kluber-Ross change acceptance curve or any of the change acceptance curves? It basically describes the human condition and your emotion through change. Denial, well, I think disbelief is first, and then denial, and then anger, and then eventually learning, acceptance, buy-in, and then motivation to perform is kind of the highest level you want to get to. You know, as CIO of my former company, we acquired 28 companies, and thank you, an assist. We acquired 28 companies, and our goal was to flatten that curve as best we could because it was a very accelerated pace of acquisition. Mergers sometimes have a longer tail, but to the degree that you can plant the seeds with the stakeholder community, and Shannon Gregg mentioned vision, communicate the vision as one of the first steps in assessing that change readiness of the stakeholder communities of both sides of the transaction. Has anyone heard of Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle? Why? I think you can also use the word why with respect to what she was describing as vision. If you can communicate to the why to the stakeholder community, that's one step. But you have to assess their readiness for change at all category levels of the organization. Now, you can't survey and interview everyone in the company. I mean, I think at our peak, we were 8,000 employees, and I've been part of a lot larger organizations and acquisitions. When Mylan bought Abbott's EPD organization, that was a $4 billion company. And so that was a pretty big honking, as a technical term, acquisition. But to the degree that you can assess the readiness state of stakeholder communities within the organization, executive leadership, middle management, call center, inventory, supply chain, people that are working in specific areas. And she also mentioned, I'm just using some of the things that she stated, this informal leadership or adopting ambassadors that are already there. They're already through the change acceptance curve because they're kind of excited about the change. They see the value of the change. So I just gave this a presentation at IUP on today's Wednesday, on Monday, and it was basically around organizational change leadership. To the degree that you can assess the stakeholder readiness of the change readiness of those stakeholder communities, you then can put a plan in place, communication and strategy and plan in place to make sure that you're moving the outliers, those stakeholders or stakeholder communities that are further away from the center of the change into the center of the change. And so in the M&A space, you have to do that pretty quickly. And I began my response with, we've matured a lot in this merger and acquisition world in that, back in the day, technology wasn't even invited to the table with due diligence. And now, it's a very important component of the due diligence process to assess both organizations, or in the case of multiple acquisitions, all organizations' capacity to absorb the change and their readiness to get through that, I guess Kubler-Ross, there's other methodologies, but to get through that acceptance curve.
Thank you. I asked this next question both for the benefit of the audience, but I think I also need some advice, so I'm going to ask everybody, starting with Kevin to the end, and we'll work our way down. Sometimes change initiatives don't work. or they're very slow. I had this conversation. I actually got a message on my watch right now about something that's not working. So I'm sure all of you have experienced that, everybody in the room. So how do you, I guess, why do you think that happens, and how do you bring those things back so that you can ultimately turn some sort of change process, change initiative into a positive instead of a negative?
Sure. Well, I think with any, sort of initiative where, whether it's a project or if it's something where you're just trying to initiate change within the organization, and if it's not happening exactly like you laid it out, you want to try to figure out a way to address it quickly. And I know sometimes it's referred to as fail fast, or what I heard somebody say this term recently. I said, well, we want to succeed more quickly, so we need to adapt to the change that's going on. So, a lot of us who are in the software development space, we develop software in an agile function or methodology. And that's one way that we're able to get something built quickly, get it in front of a user group or the business to understand, is this exactly what you're looking for? And if it's not, it allows us to pivot. And I think it's really important, whether it's something like developing software or if you're initiating a new process within your organization, you need to have quick moments in time where you assess and pivot if it's needed. And so that's one thing that, just from my software development background, that I take, but I take it to a greater scale when I talk about process and people.
Yep. In my experience, I've been part of transformation movements my entire career, with global corporations, with software service startups, and also with a range of clients. Often I've seen the biggest reason for something stalling or not quite working is if there is a shift, or maybe just not full support from leadership, and I'll just say that generally speaking. It could be the top leadership, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, they must be bought in and actively supporting and sort of also pivoting and shifting in how they do that. But even sort of the next layer of leadership as well can be, again, where some of that stall happens. I am going to also kind of harken back a comment you made in that the most effective way I've ever seen to affect change is to find, I call them champions, I think you call them something else, but the individuals that already start to see the vision, they bought into it, maybe they are even more committed to it and have fresh ideas from what sort of the vision promoter has. And I can sort of just give one example of that. In a recent experience, I described actually this kind of skill set of people that I think are really great employees and ways to build skills for the ambiguous environments. After hiring some of these folks, and not everyone began to work with the talent acquisition person in a cross-functional fashion, who was absolutely a champion. He had worked in startups, he worked in global corporations, he understood the type of skill and also then brought his own expertise to the table and started to then hire for the team, and then took that and actually embedded it in his own processes moving forward for positions where that made a lot of sense to do that. So that was an example of getting something going where it didn't exist, but I think it applies to if something stalls as well.
So how many people attended the last session, Shane and Greg's session? Does anyone, wow, that's a lot. Does anyone remember what she said was the number one driver of success in introducing change to the organization? The number one factor that contributed to the success of the change. Does anyone remember what it was? So,
Leadership buy-in.
Leadership buy-in. Leadership sponsorship. Complacent leadership will kill organizational change initiatives and your ability to introduce change. The one thing I didn't agree with Shannon Gregg on was that people are fearful. I don't think that's true. and yes, I think AI, am I allowed to use that word? Is a different beast, right? So there may be lack of awareness or understanding, but I don't think it's fear. But I think in the past, I got a great story, and we may not have time for me to tell it, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I was leading the IT function of a large merger, two $500 million companies coming together to create one of the largest freight logistics companies in the country at the time, back in 2000, whatever that was, 6. And we did apply some change management technique and methodology and framework, but probably not to the degree that we should have. There were 145 offices across the country. Anyways, long story short, the CIO who lived in Long Beach, so I had to fly all the way out to California to meet with this person because we didn't have Zoom and Teams. It was crazy. It was a crazy year for me. A lot of miles. We were rolling all of these. We were rolling out the implementation of one of the company's core operating system. Let's call it an ERP. And it was mandated, so there was no discussion about that. It was like, we're going with this. And my team landed in a city to begin the week-long migration training and all that. Their management team didn't show up to work on that Monday. They, what's the term, silent quitting?
Quiet quitting.
That was the prelude to our silent quitting now. They just did not show, they quit, they resigned. They didn't like what was happening with the merger. They may have not liked the system that they were going to have to use. I don't know, but when I say management team, I'm talking about the 4 top people in the office at that particular city. And so I get a call from one of my people that are boots on the ground there saying, we got an issue here. So as you can imagine, we had to, assemble a plan B. And I ended up flying down there, and we had a town hall meeting with the workforce. And the one thing that we did that I think was successful in that particular circumstance is we spun up focus groups very quickly. We should have done this to begin with. And lessons learned. We spun up focus groups to have real-time feedback from certain people. I think I used the word ambassador. What did you use? Champion. Yeah, the informal champions. And we had regular communication with these folks because we had a lot of work to do to kind of lessen the blow, if you will, of the management team. And then we had to import people from other cities to play a managerial role. So I think every circumstance and situation is different. There's a lot of things you can do that can prevent those scenarios and situations, but at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know sometimes. But having a team that has a strong tribe-like collaboration culture is really important, because my folks could have been like, oh, I'm not dealing with this, right? But they dug in, they leaned in, and we made it work.
Great. Thank you all for that fantastic insight. We have some time left, about 20 minutes, I think, left. So I want to turn it over to the audience, the folks here. Again, thanks for coming out. But I'm sure there are some questions. So we have an open mic. Anybody have any questions they want to ask the group about how you can evoke change? What's your employees, staff, people behind that change, or good to go? And walk over here. Thank you for raising your hand. I'll give you a prize or something. Yeah.
Brad Reba at GD Life. So we've got a financial services product system that, as we're moving to more digital solutions, I've got a lot of technical staff that knows the systems, that we own systems intuitively, and always can come to conclusions on data patterns by looking at data sets in a way that some of the tools that we're trying to roll out, which you all talked about, are still behind. They make mistakes or kind of misled based on bias and other factors. So how do you get those sort of experts on your team that are there for a reason? We rely on their historical knowledge and their just intuitive understanding of systems to buy into. You're actually going to be helping train these systems to be able, because we can't replicate your brain, but we can try to as much as we can aggregate it and use that as an augmentation for the folks that are coming up in the organization that just don't have the 40, 50 plus years experience.
This is not an uncommon problem. The lessons I've learned throughout the past, I don't know how many years, documentation goes a long way. Knowledge capital on paper or electronically in our world is important, right? So I think establishing performance objectives for those experts and the knowledge czars, if you will, is really, really important as step number one. Step number two is, if you can somehow include some sort of performance benefit to have those folks lean in and contribute to the training and the process. I think that is another mechanism you can use to get them to lean in and contribute, right, to the change acceptance by the others. Knowledge capital is job security, and sometimes folks don't use that power for good. They use it, to serve themselves. But I think to the degree that you can include in their performance objectives those two things, documentation, and then providing some benefit, whether you want to call it a bonus or get creative about what that would look like, but it has to be goal-oriented. We need to achieve this, we need to achieve this, we need to achieve this, and we need you to be a part of that. I think to the degree that you can ask them how best to do that, so they have a role in actually the process and the method that you are going to use to enact that change and get people on board the bus, if you will, I think it is valuable as well.
I can add a comment. I was involved in one of the early global SAP ERP implementations as part of the chemical industry. They were really the first to move in that space. And in addition to making sure you understand where those knowledge experts are from a system and technical perspective, we recruited from the business to join them and force them to work together. I was from the business, that's how I got into working with my technical colleagues. And at the end of that, I identified myself very differently. But I think that's one way to then complement where you've got some risk, where you don't have some documentation, and you've got some of the, those pockets of expertise. I want to tell this other story about how to think about champions too, in a way to celebrate them. It'll probably need a little modification for everybody in their industry, but has anyone ever seen this video called The Dancing Man?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If at your in your spare time, I would sort of look it up, and I would pick the one that doesn't have a lot of narration. There's one out there that has a lot of narration, and I think it's distracting. But basically, it's the idea of the change leader. Gets up in this, I'm kind of like spoiler alert, hope nobody minds, but they're at this sort of outdoor festival, music festival, and this change leader, right, this kind of kooky person gets up and starts dancing, around and like having a great time, and then eventually no one else is dancing, right, and then eventually another person joins in. And that change leader is very clear to sort of pass that baton to that second person joining. So some of your experts that you can recruit and celebrate. And then the third and the fourth, and sort of made a big deal about passing that celebration, recognition for being the steam that carries the change to the next level is really important. It means that, and the reason I wouldn't listen to the narrated one is because at the end, this person says, oh, the person that started it gets all the recognition. Well, I disagree. It's actually the ones that carried it forward that are going to get that recognition and really should, because they're the ones that are going to scale the change. So for what that inspires, that's how I would think about celebrating champions and how important that is.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add on there is just, Robert really talked about how, having people buy in to the process and owning the knowledge that they have and what success is going to look like if they really end up, pushing all in. So, I guess with my voice being the way it is, I'll just end it there.
Thank you. Thanks. If I could add one thing besides champions, definitely what was said there at the end, we try to make sure that the folks that know the information can help refine the process. We've seen a lot of success with that. As a critic within a financial institution, we have a lot of folks that have been there for a very long time. I remember the days when there were a lot of paper checks and pushing papers back and forth. And so we can convince them and bring them into the change the process. We've seen some progress, and that also helps. It's not always possible, but we've also seen that as well. And champions, we have more champions, and I can shake a stick. We have champions of champions, but it does work. And we have different branches, and in every branch, somebody is a champion of something, and it has actually helped us to drive a brand that will change along. Other questions for the group? Oh, I see multiple hands, and I have to get more prizes. I assume my 2 last prizes. Good luck on that. I'll start with you, and then I'll come back to you if you're all right.
Quick question on, T-shaped purple people, hires, new hires. I just wonder your hot takes for the 3 panelists on, are we looking at generalists versus specialists? So our education process, our hiring process of the past has been around specialists. Go for your master's, go for your PhD, you're really specialized. We'll pay you more and you'll do a great job for us. If AI is, as we saw in the keynote this morning, is smarter than any PhD at anything on all domains, eventually, like we're getting close, it's debatable, but we're gonna be there. Is the generalist, and how do you hire a generalist? Is that the most important hire looking towards the workforce of the future? I have an 18, a 16, a 13-year-old, so I'm very interested selfishly as well for my children.
So at IUP, when I presented on Monday, one of the students asked me the question, what are the things that you look for in a new hire? And I think it relates to your question in that, I don't know if it's a generalist, but I think people who enter the workforce that have good problem-solving skills and can talk to how they go about solving a problem. When I was at Elvers and Marcel, we would run all of our new hires, college candidates, through this business case. It was a day-long business case. It was kind of fun from our side. They actually, we put them in teams. So we got an opportunity to see how they break down problems based on a narrative business case. And the second piece of that, and part of my answer on Monday, was people who can collaborate, check their ego at the door, and work toward team objectives and goals. And at Elvers and Marcel, when we were doing these day-long business cases, we saw how they would work together because we were observing this. They weren't sent off to a room. One of us was in a room with each one of the teams. We didn't talk, but we were able to observe how they interact with one another, how, who surfaced as the leader to facilitate. So I think those 2 things are very important. At the end of the day, in the year 2025, many of the technical skills can be taught. I know prompt engineer is new to the scene, but that too can be taught. But problem solving and collaboration, the ability to work with other humans in a way that produces results and outcomes that are valuable, I think are 2 really big characteristics of anyone, college entry into the workforce or seasoned, experienced person coming from another company. I think it's really important. And I think that to the degree people that can describe how they solve problems, give examples, and how they collaborate and their feeling about collaboration goes a long way.
Absolutely. Problem solving, collaboration. My hot take that I'll add to that is that what I was kind of describing on the T is the self-learner. So the generalist that's not afraid to go dive deep, and learn what they need to know, and or collaborate with someone who can go deep. So I don't think it rules out, the deep experts. And in truth, I've seen T-shaped people from every walk of life. So I think that's encouraging. A diverse team is a great way to build creativity skills as humans, which is a way to lean in and then collaborate with our, expert partner, AI, as we move through the world. So as I think about my 14-year-old son, I would love him to lean into sort of design thinking skills and build that creativity that also comes with a rigor and a discipline. But he's 14, so we'll see what he does.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think you do need people that do that and are specialized. But you do need people that are generalists, that can bring them all together to form a team to accomplish a task. And so, when I look at hiring, people, it just depends on, are there certain needs that we see in the market that are needed to have that specialization. But I think, personally, we're always going to look for really smart people that can problem solve and pick things up quickly. And that's a skill set that is it's very valuable. So.
Thanks. With regard to Robert's comments on the acquisitions, I thought your story on the freight trucking company that was not, looking, or they were not excited about adopting a new technology. I think it understates the point that some of the old school industries or industrial trucking, they can be much more hesitant to adopt that kind of transformational change versus, just like a technology startup. But, even like the way you refer to it, trucking and freight versus supply chain and logistics, right? It's sort of the same thing, but just like the old school, But my question, you talked about 28 acquisitions, and I could open this to the panel, but when you look at those 28 acquisitions, is there any you kind of look back on and it's like, oh, I wish, we had that kind of due diligence, or, I wish we saw that, or we should have seen that, or now with current technology, we could have seen this. But I'm just curious, with over 30 acquisitions, which ones you kind of look at maybe now and say, just from the diligence process, anything?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think getting a do-over with some of them, I think could have produced quicker and better results on our integration path. You don't know what you don't know, which, by the way, is why I think it's so important during the due diligence process that you do those stakeholder interviews from a cultural assessment perspective. Pritchett Associates, they do an M&A integration certification. I've renewed mine for the past, I don't know how many decades. And more recently, they've added cultural assessments to their due diligence methodology. And the challenge is, I think, getting some of the senior level executive folks to embrace this idea of doing a cultural assessment. Because their cultural assessment might be, hey, I know the person that owns that company or the person that built that company. I'll tell you if they're a cultural fit or not. But I think the personality and characteristics of the senior most leader in the company that's getting acquired drives either a lot of drama or drives a lot of efficiency as it relates to the integration process. So doing those stakeholder readiness or change readiness assessments, and I've got a methodology that has 7 categories of change readiness, and there's probably a dozen or more other methodologies out there. But doing those assessments on the stakeholders could give you some perspective on who you will need to spend more time in planting seeds of change strategy and change readiness than others. I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's what going forward, if I find myself in a company that is highly acquisitive and I have that leadership role, I'm going to all but demand or require us to do those cultural assessments during due diligence, because they do produce information that you can use to make it easier on them as well as the company that's bringing them in to the organization.
I can just add, I was brought into an organization post-acquisition to try to help make good on the value of what they were brought in to be, which was a little different from what they were designed to execute in the market, which is tricky. And as you were talking, I was just sort of reflecting, because it was really hard. There were these new skill sets to function. It was a software solution to wrap around a new device. So different mindsets, different skill sets, different ways of operating, and how to meld them and sort of create a good culture. And something you said really struck me, because the person that was the founder that did come with the company, I would, on reflection, agree that that was the source of a lot of drama. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know for what that means. Eventually he did, part ways. But it had already created a rough culture, in that existing organization. So there's probably some sweet spot of timing that goes with that. I don't know what that is, but yeah.
Yeah, and I was a part of an acquisition as well. I think most people that are in technology, you've probably been involved in one. And culture was a big thing. I mean, half the people that were in the company that got acquired left in the first probably 30 to 60 days. So I think doing the cultural assessment is important as you go into any of those types of things.
I would also reiterate, culture is important. My space is a little bit different. We have much smaller mergers, but we recently did 2 mergers, and from a credit union perspective, they had 2 branches, 50 people. We have several hundred, and to bring that culture in was very, very different. So if we had asked some questions up front, we probably would have done things a little bit differently, because the executive team did cause a lot of drama for us that we just didn't need, and then they all left. So. With that, we are almost at time, so we will be at time, because I don't think we have any other questions will take us over our 3:20 mark. So one more time, I want to thank our panelists for being here today.